Welcome to Sino-Warfare with Ralph D. Sawyer.
China's voluminous military writings all ponder the issue of command and control. Naturally, the general's qualification and defects figure prominently, with wisdom being accorded precedence among the essential virtues of wisdom, credibility, benevolence, courage, and strictness. Sunzi, in fact, frequently points out that ignorance dooms the army to failure. However, any commander who lacks even one of them, or even worse, acts contrary to them, is fatally flawed. Thus he says, the general is the state's pillar. If his talents are all-encompassing, the state will invariably be strong. If the pillar is marked by fissures, the state will invariably grow weak. Now obviously these and other dangerous flaws can and should be targeted for exploitation. For example, he said, one committed to dying can be slain. One committed to living can be captured. One easily angered and hasty can be insulted. One obsessed with being scrupulous and untainted can be shamed. One who loves the people can be troubled. The army's destruction and the general's death will invariably stem from these five, so they must be investigated. Now, as previously noted, the Army should be employed only when the assessment process indicates a favorable outcome, not out of personal desire or emotion. Accordingly, quote, the wise must contemplate the intermixture of gain and loss. If they discern advantage, their efforts can be trusted. If they discern harm, difficulties can be resolved. So again, the emphasis on wisdom. In the context of spring and autumn warfare, commanders had been expected to follow the ruler's directives and gain victory, irrespective of any previous mandates. However, because of the rapidly changing nature of the battlefield and the impossibility of timely communications, Sunzi made the radical assertion that field commanders must be free to ignore the monarch's orders and act on their own initiative. Therefore, he says, if the Tao of warfare indicates certain victory, even though the ruler has instructed that combat should be avoided, if you must engage in battle, it's permissible. If the Tao of warfare indicates you won't be victorious, even though the ruler instructs you to engage in battle, not fighting is permissible. Generals who do not advance to seek fame, nor fail to retreat to avoid being charged with the capital offense of retreating, but seek only to preserve the people and gain advantage for the ruler, are the state's treasure. The art of war describes three ways in which imperial interference dooms an army. Quoting, the ruler doesn't know that the three armies shouldn't advance, but instructs them to advance, or doesn't know that the three armies shouldn't withdraw and orders a retreat. This is termed entangling the army. He doesn't understand the three armies' military affairs, but directs them in the same way as his civil administration. Then the officers will become confused. He doesn't understand the three armies' tactical balance of power, but undertakes responsibility for command. Then the officers will be doubtful. This sort of interference produces dire results. Sunzi says, when the three armies are confused and doubtful, the danger of the feudal lords taking advantage of the situation arises. This is referred to as a disordered army drawing another on to victory. And Sunzi also said, assembling the masses of the three armies and throwing them into danger is the general's responsibility. Now, the essential problem is forging a clearly defined, hierarchical organization that can effectively exercise control over disciplined troops. Dividing them into operational units provides the necessary structure. Sunzi says, commanding a large number is like commanding a few. It's a question of dividing up the numbers. Fighting with a large number is like fighting with a few. It's a question of configuration and designation. Although the art of war doesn't discuss them, complex formations capable of responding to the commander's orders had already started appearing in Sunzi's era. He does say, gongs, drums, pennants, and flags are the means to unify the men's ears and eyes. When the men have been unified, the courageous will not be able to advance alone. The fearful will not be able to retreat alone. This is the method for employing large numbers. As a result, Sunzi surprisingly states, quote, "Someone who excels at warfare seeks victory through the strategic configuration of power, not from relying on men. Thus he is able to select men and employ strategic power. One who employs strategic power commands men in battle as if he were rolling logs and stones." And separately he adds, "One who excels at employing the army leads them by the hand, as if they were only one man, so they cannot avoid it." Rewards and punishments, the so-called twin handles, together with mutual responsibility, which the art of war doesn't discuss, were considered the foundation of military discipline. However, just like in the exercise with the palace women, instruction and training must precede their utilization. Consistency is essential. Sunzi says, if orders that instruct the people are consistently implemented, the people will submit. If they aren't consistently implemented, the people will not submit. One whose orders are consistently carried out has established a mutual relationship with the people. Motivation can be largely reduced to anger and incentives. Sunzi says, what motivates men to slay the enemy is anger. What stimulates them to seize advantage from the enemy is material goods. When you plunder a district, divide the wealth among your troops. When you enlarge your territory, divide the profits. However, the commander has to gain their allegiance, but he doesn't specify any concrete measures. Sunzi says, those who excel at employing the army cultivate the Tao and preserve the law. They command with the civil and unify through the martial, so that the upper and lower ranks have the same desires. One whose upper and lower ranks have the same desires will be victorious. Only thereafter will the threat of punishment prove effective. Sunzi says, if you impose punishments on the troops before they become attached, they won't be submissive. If they aren't submissive, they will be difficult to employ. If you don't impose punishments after the troops become attached, they cannot be used. And he believes solicitude rather than cruelty and harshness to be essential. Sunzi says, when the general regards his troops as young children, they will advance into the deepest valleys with him. When he regards them as his beloved children, they will be willing to die with him. However, inadequate strictness can have a contrary effect. Sunzi notes that if they are well treated but cannot be employed, if they are loved but cannot be commanded, or in chaos cannot be governed, they may be compared to arrogant children and cannot be used. Sunzi describes 6 disastrous situations that, quote, aren't brought about by heaven and earth, but by the general's errors.
Their power is equal, but one attacks 10. The troops are strong, but the officers weak. The officers are strong, but the troops weak. The higher officers are angry and insubordinate, and they angrily engage the enemy. The general is weak and lax. The officers and troops lack constant duties, and their deployment into formation is askew. Unable to fathom the enemy, the commander engages a large number with a small number, or attacks the strong with the weak.
As previously mentioned, secrecy is another essential. Sunzi said, when you mobilize the army and form strategic plans, you must be unfathomable. But his approach to command extends the need for secrecy to the general's own forces, which brings about total ignorance until the appropriate moment. Since no one ever knows the commander's plans or intent, the troops can only respond like automatons. At the moment the general has designated, it will be as if they ascended a height and abandoned their ladders. The general advances with them deep into the territory of the feudal lords and releases the trigger. He commands them as if racing a herd of sheep. They are driven away, driven back, but no one knows where they are going. The decisive element then becomes the soldier's combat spirit or qi. It was well known that the men had to be treated reasonably well and properly fed, and prolonged warfare and other hardships that debilitate their spirit minimized. For then their qi will be united and their strength at maximum. More importantly, in Sunzi's era, both their and the enemy's qi had already become objects of conscious manipulation. Sunzi says the three armies' qi can be snatched away. The commanding general's mind can be seized. In the morning, their qi is ardent. During the day, their qi becomes indolent. At dusk, their qi is exhausted. One who excels at employing the army avoids their ardent qi and strikes when it is indolent or exhausted. This is the way to manipulate qi. A spring and autumn battle that unfolded in 683 BC, century and a half before Sunzi, preserves the first military enunciation. When asked why he had delayed the beating of the drums to engage the enemy, Cao Gui replied, quote, "Combat is a matter of courageous qi. A single drumming arouses the soldier's qi. With a second, it abates, and with a third, it's exhausted. They were exhausted while we were vigorous, so we conquered them." In view of qi's role in powering victory, whether they face hopeless or just difficult situations, commanders can result to the natural human tendency to fight fervently when cornered. Sunzi says, "Cast them into positions from which there is nowhere to go, and they will die without retreating. If there is no escape from death, the officers and soldiers will fully exhaust their strength. Only after the troops have penetrated dangerous terrain will they be able to craft victory out of defeat." This, of course, explains his admonition not to obstruct armies in retreat, press exhausted invaders, or fail to leave an outlet for the besieged to escape. Now, fatal terrain, Sidi, dead, earth, is itself defined as, quote, "where there's no place to go. If they fight fervently, they will survive, but if they don't, they will perish." The exploitation of so-called fatal terrain is the only situation in which the commander doesn't prevent the troops from knowing the potential harm. However, omens should still be prohibited to avoid spawning doubt and bringing about a complete collapse. Then, as the text dramatically describes, on the day that the orders are issued, the tears of the soldiers who are sitting about will soak their sleeves, and the tears of those lying down will roll down their cheeks. However, if you throw them into a hopeless situation, they will have the courage of Zhu or Gui. Now, qi's cultivation and manipulation will be revisited in our discussion of Sun Bin's military methods. But before that, you may consult my extensive study of martial qi in China, which is freely downloadable from the Journal of Military and Strategic Studies website, www.jmss.org. As always, thank you for watching. And if you haven't become a subscriber yet, please consider hitting the button, as will help ensure our continued visibility.